death of George Floyd energized a movement, and today he was buried in Houston. The service took place at Fountain of Praise Church in Houston and comes with 5 days of public memorials in Minneapolis, North Carolina, as well as Houston, and all of this just 2 weeks after a Minneapolis police officer killed George Floyd on video by kneeling on his neck. Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy at George Floyd's funeral and led the family into the Fountain of Praise Church in Houston. Joe Biden offered condolences to the grieving family of George Floyd during a taped emotional address played at his funeral. This is what Biden had to say.
When there is justice for George Floyd, we will truly be on our way to racial justice in America.
Now, also at George Floyd's funeral, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, actors Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx, all in attendance. Now, 3 days after Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan and Chief of Police Carmen Best instituted a 30-day ban on the use of tear gas against protesters in Seattle, well, 3 days after that ban, the police once again used tear gas on a Sunday night protest. After midnight on Sunday night, sometime Monday morning, the Seattle Police Department tweeted, CS gas, which I guess is the tear gas, has been authorized in the interest of public and life safety. Leave the area now. So it took them a total of 3 days to break their promise. Footage of the protests around midnight shows gas filling the Seattle streets and protesters running while the sounds of explosions from flashbangs continue for at least 20 minutes. It looks like a war zone going on there in the streets of Seattle. The Trump administration was heavily criticized last week for using tear gas to move protesters, if you remember, in front of the gates of the White House so Trump could take a walk and take a picture holding up the Bible backwards. Now, tear gas is dangerous. In Ohio last month, Sarah Grossman, a 22-year-old protester, she was killed at a protest against police brutality after being exposed to tear gas that the police shot into the crowd. So you can literally die from that. Now, meanwhile, in New York City, a police officer who shoved a protester who hit her head, well, he surrendered to face criminal charges on Tuesday. This is 11 days after he was recorded on video shoving a woman to the ground, calling her a bitch. And this was after she asked him why he told her to get out of the street. The victim suffered a concussion and a seizure. And there we just watched what happened. Now, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office charged the officer, Vincent D'Andrea, in a criminal complaint with misdemeanor assault, criminal mischief, harassment, and menacing over the May 29th incident. Now, what do all of this have in common? It's people are taking videos. We see they're showing what's going on to the world. You know, the iPhone, it changed the way we communicate. It changed the way we listen to music. It changed the way we watch television. And now I believe the iPhone is going to be the tool in which we change the world, where we bring to the world the abuses by the police, the racial profiling by the police. And here is another example. We're seeing it every day. Yesterday, Democrats unveiled what could be the most sweeping overhaul of federal policing laws in decades. It's called the Justice and Policing Act of 2020. It is meant to reform the roughly 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. There are 18,000 different law enforcement agencies in the United States of America. That is a lot of different law enforcement agencies, even in a country with 300 million people. Now, before introducing it, some Democrats and members of the Congressional Black Caucus knelt. They held a moment of silence for the 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That was the exact time. Now fired police officer Derek Chauvin held his knee on George Floyd's neck. Now, the legislation would ban police chokeholds, prohibit no-knock warrants in drug cases like the one that was used when Breonna Taylor was killed in Lexington, Kentucky. The bill would also create a registry to track records of officers' misconduct, discipline, and termination. We don't know who the bad cops are, and we don't even know if a cop gets a complaint against him. For example, I think Chauvin had 19 complaints against him 19 disciplinary complaints. Nobody knew about it. Now, House Democrats also want to lower the standards for qualified immunity, which broadly protects officers from civil lawsuits, and also give the Department of Justice more powers to investigate police misconduct. And for the first time ever, lynching would be made a federal crime. You can't believe that in 2020, lynching is not a federal crime. Now, while House Democrats hope to pass the bill by the end of this month, we don't know what is going to happen in the GOP-led Senate. So we'll see. We'll see if that ever goes to pass. Now, in New York, legislative leaders on Monday began to approve an expansive package of bills targeting police misconduct. The measures range from a ban on the use of chokeholds to the repeal of an obscure decades-old statute that hides the disciplinary records of police officers. The legislation marks one of the most substantial policy changes to result from nearly 2 weeks of national unrest. The proposals signify a turning point in Albany because these proposals have been debated for years and never passed. And now, at least certainly in New York, we're going to pass legislation that bans the use of chokeholds. We're going to pass legislation that now we can see the disciplinary records of every police officer. And it is certainly not the end, but it is at least certainly a start. Now, according to a new Washington Post poll, Americans are overwhelmingly support the nationwide protests that have taken place since the killing of George Floyd. President Trump has received negative marks, no surprise, for his handling of the protests. 61% say they disapprove of the way he's handling the protests. Only 35% say they approve. I don't know where these 35% people are, where 1 out of 3 Americans can say they can approve of what Trump is doing, but at least 66% of Americans or 61% of Americans are giving him a negative mark. 47% are giving him a vehemently negative remark, saying they strongly disapprove of the way Trump is handling this. Now, what's most interesting is not that, people don't like what Trump is doing. It's not a shock. What's most interesting is the shift in opinions from 6 years ago, when police killed an unarmed black man in Ferguson, Missouri, and in New York with the chokehold, what people's opinions were 6 years ago to today. 6 years ago, only 43% of Americans described the deaths of 2 black men by the police, both unarmed, as indicative of a broader problem in policing, while 51% saw them as an isolated incident. So basically, 50% of America said it's an isolated incident. Only 43% described it as a big problem. This is indicative of a bigger problem. Only 4 out of 10 people said that 6 years ago. Well, today, 69%, more than 2 in 3 Americans, almost 7 out of every 10 people, say the killing of George Floyd represents a broader problem with law enforcement. This is a big turning point in America. When people say they feel things are different, it's different not only because the size of the protests, it's different because the attitude of Americans have changed in the last 6 years. We are seeing a broad majority of people, almost 7 out of every 10 people, saying there is a big problem with law enforcement in America as they profile young black men. That, to me, besides, of course, these big protests, that to me really shows why people are saying, I feel this time it's a little different. Now, you may remember at the height of the protests, there was a night on Monday night that Donald Trump, it was reported, went into a bunker in the White House, and he came out the next day and said, I didn't go into any bunker in the White House. I just went to go inspect. I wasn't scared. We had lots of people there to protect me. Well, Porky, Attorney General Barr, he said on an interview with Fox News yesterday, that's not necessarily true, pumpkin guy. He said things were so bad that the Secret Service recommended the president go down to the bunker. We can't have that in our country. So Attorney General William Barr said Trump went into the bunker because the Secret Service was scared for Trump's life being in that White House. Now, as the protests over police brutality and the killing of George Floyd ramped up, and as it appears that Donald Trump went into his bunker for fear of his life on that Monday night, the Trump administration finally did get their fence, except it's a fence around the White House. It is a fortified area of 1.7 miles of mesh metal fencing and police guards that are now surrounding the White House. The Secret Service said last week the entire area, in fact, around the White House complex would remain closed until June 10th. Now, while the closest the public can get to the White House is about 600 feet away, the fence around the People's House is being reclaimed by people again as they post art and signs. Kai Gamania hung a painting featuring his take on the raised fists widely associated with the Black Panther Party. In the piece, the fist is flanked by a crown on one side and a pyramid on the other. Gramaya, who is a surgical technician, also participated in Sunday's protest and said the fence was much emptier then. He was moved to see it fill up with work so quickly and said the barrier itself had become part of the demonstrations. Said Gamania, it's like the whole nation is crying and this whole fence is crying. And if you were to back up and see it from the beginning to the end, it's nothing but posters from all the way down. Now, attorneys in Minneapolis, there were 4 cops who've been arrested now in the death of George Floyd. They all appeared in court yesterday for the first time in Hennepin County. Now, lawyers for J. Alexander Kung and Thomas Lane, they argued that their clients tried to stop Officer Derek Chauvin from kneeling on Floyd's neck, but were ignored. I didn't see that on the video at all, but that's what they're claiming. Kung, Lane, and Tao face charges of felony aiding and abetting. We talked about this yesterday with David Moreno. If they are found guilty of aiding in the second-degree murder of George Floyd, they will get the same amount of time as Derek Chauvin, or potentially could get it up to 40 years in prison. They're being held on a $750,000 bond. Now, we'll see what happens with all of that. What was very interesting was on Friday, the NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, he said that we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encouraging all to speak out and peacefully protest. If you remember, for the last couple of years, it started with Colin Kaepernick back in 2016. He was kneeling during the Star-Spangled Banner at every NFL game. He was finally kicked out of the NFL for causing what was a social discourse amongst NFL players. Many started to kneel. People said that was disrespectful to the flag. It was disrespectful to our Star-Spangled Banner. And for years, we've been talking about this on Bradshaw Live, well before George Floyd. And it had nothing to do with the flag. It had nothing to do with the Star-Spangled Banner. As far as I'm concerned, the flag is just a symbol. It doesn't mean anything. What they were doing was they were saying it is not right what is going on with policing of Black men and the Black community in America. And the NFL eventually made all of their players stand. There was a big backlash against them because the NFL says, you know what, we're in the business of making money. We're not in the business of social protesting. And then they started doing some PSA commercials with the players to highlight, inequality and racial discrimination by the police. But they really made the players stop kneeling, and they basically ruined Colin Kaepernick's career. He was kicked out of the NFL. No NFL team wanted him. They felt he was way too controversial. But it turns out that, in the NFL, most of their employees are Black. Most of the players are Black. And they have to understand and empathize with their employees and stand with their employees. It's these players who are making the NFL the money. So now, 4 years later, Roger Goodell came full circle. A statement made in a video over Twitter came a day after nearly 20 players called on the NFL to take a stronger stance. Said in the NFL statement, "We, the NFL, condemn racism and the systemic oppression of black people. We, the NFL, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the NFL, believe Black Lives Matter." And it was, when you say, I don't understand where the controversy of using the term Black Lives, I'm glad the NFL finally says, we, the NFL, believe Black Lives Matter. I never understood the controversy of why it was controversial for anyone to argue Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black Lives Matter. And just because you say Black Lives Matter doesn't mean somebody else's life doesn't matter. But we're saying Black Lives Matter. And to argue Black lives don't matter, Black lives matter less, of course Black lives matter. So I never understood, even as a white person who's not Black, I never understood where there was a controversy of using the term Black Lives Matter. Of course Black Lives Matter. Now, the league statement makes no reference to the former San Francisco quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who has been the most visible protester within the NFL against police brutality, as we talked about. So we'll see. I believe Kaepernick will. I believe Kaepernick is going to eventually get a job with the NFL somewhere this year. Now, the issue was thrust back into the spotlight. This all started putting the NFL back into the spotlight when Drew Brees, and for those who don't follow the NFL, I'm a big NFL fan, love football. Drew Brees, who is one of the top quarterbacks, he's going to ultimately be in the NFL Hall of Fame when he retires. One of the top quarterbacks, holds lots of passing records, plays for the New Orleans Saints. He's a white quarterback, and he spoke up saying he didn't support players kneeling during the national anthem. He was talking about several years ago. And during an interview Wednesday, and this all started during an interview Wednesday with Yahoo Finance, where Drew Brees said that he will never agree, and I'm quoting Drew Brees, he would never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America. Now, Brees, as I said, he's white, discussed patriotism and referred to his grandfathers who fought in World War II. He also said standing for the national anthem with a hand over one's heart shows unity and shows we're all in this together. Now, the quarterback's comments drew swift and rapid condemnation. He apologized. It was certainly not something that was smart for him to say. Trump weighed in on the backlash, slamming Brees for apologizing. Trump said he should never have taken back his original stance on honoring our magnificent American flag. Oh, glory to be revered, cherished, and flown high. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump says he wants to change the Constitution to make it a crime to desecrate the flag. That would be like the worst thing in the world that we can do. The flag is basically cloth. It doesn't mean anything. It is a piece of cloth. What means something is civil rights. Civil rights means something. I want to be treated equal to everybody else. Everybody should be treated equal. What means something is in our country that we have the right to disagree with the way our country is being run. We have a right to say, this ain't right. We have a right to say, I'm going to bring it to your attention. And if that means bringing it to your attention by going down on your knee, and now, by the way, going down on your knee means two things, because not only does it represent what Colin Kaepernick did, it also represents what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd. But you should never, never, ever, I hope we never get to the day where they make desecrating the flag a crime under the Constitution. It would be a slippery slope. Where does, peaceful, where does protest and where does art, because there's a lot of artists who use the American flag, where does it end? All of a sudden artists start getting arrested as well. But to me, the flag has no meaning to it because it's just a cloth. The song has no meaning to it. It's just a song, the Star Spangled Banner. What has meaning is that we have rights in our country. We have legal rights to say we don't like something. And we have a long history in this country of protesting and changing the way that we live, changing the way that we are ruled, changing our laws by having our voices being heard. The United States Marine Corps has banned all depictions of the Confederate battle flag at its installations. A Marine administrative message outlined the ban, which would prohibit wearing Marine t-shirts, drinking coffee with mugs that feature the flag on installations. Marine commanders will have to find and get rid of any displays that of the flag within workspaces and public areas. No other military branch has announced such a policy, but this is the statement from the Marines. It said the Confederate battle flag has all too often been co-opted by violent extremists and racist groups whose divisive beliefs have no place in our Corps. This presents a threat to our core values, unit cohesion, security, and good order and discipline, and this must be addressed. Now, Defense Secretary Mark Esper and Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy also signaled their willingness to discuss scrapping Confederate names on forts across the country. I didn't know this, but you've heard of these forts: Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Benning in Georgia, and Fort Hood in Texas. These are huge, huge military installations in the United States of America. Bragg, Benning, and Hood were all Confederate generals. I had no idea. I just actually learned this now. Why are we naming huge military installations in memory of racists who tried to leave our union? Why 150 years later? I don't think it should be called Fort Bragg anymore, and it shouldn't be called Fort Benning, and it shouldn't be called Fort Hood. We got to get to coronavirus too. There's a lot going on. According to statistics from the Johns Hopkins University, there's now 7.1 million people with coronavirus worldwide. The nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he delivered a grim assessment of the devastation brought around the world by the virus, describing coronavirus today as his worst nightmare. I think it's everybody's worst nightmare, not just his. Fauci said in a period of 4 months, it has devastated the whole world, and it is not over yet. An efficiently transmitted disease can spread worldwide in 6 months or a year, but this one took only a month, he said. Now, Fauci made the remarks on the same day that the World Health Organization walked back an earlier assertion. They asserted on Monday that if you have coronavirus, but you have no symptoms, you don't have fever, you don't have a cough, your eyes aren't red, you can't transmit it to somebody else. And now they took that back. The World Health Organization has changed and told us different things on a daily basis. We should wear a mask, we shouldn't wear a mask. If you have coronavirus, you don't have any symptoms of coronavirus, you can't give it to people. Well, now you can, now you can't. We don't know what to believe from this World Health Organization anymore. I don't know what to believe anymore. Now, parts of the country that had previously avoided being hit hard by the coronavirus outbreak are now tallying record high infections, including Puerto Rico, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Florida, Kentucky, New Mexico. All are having high levels of coronavirus infections. Now, health experts worry that these areas may be short of resources because of increasing numbers of coronavirus. And finally, Jamie Stenja, a 103-year-old woman who recently survived a bout with the coronavirus, celebrated not by drinking a Corona Light, but by drinking a Bud Light. Now, 3 weeks ago, Stenja was the first to test positive for coronavirus in the Massachusetts nursing home. She had a low-grade fever. She was moved to a separate ward. She didn't really grasp or understand coronavirus, but she knew she was sick. As Stenja's condition worsened, her granddaughter called to say what they thought were their final goodbyes to her. And when her granddaughter's husband, Adam Gunn, asked whether Stenja was ready to go to heaven, she replied, "Hell yes." But Stenja recovered. She's not ready to go yet. And the staff gave her an ice-cold Bud Light to celebrate, something she loves but did not have in a very, very long time. Thanks for watching. For more Bradshaw Live, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.